Well, in the Chad Daybell trial this week, the defense, it has rested its case in chief. Wait a minute. But now, there's some other things coming down the bend. There's rebuttal witnesses. What does that mean, and how will that impact the trial? Well, this and more we're going to talk about on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. Yep, it's what some people are calling, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this Memorial Day weekend edition of Charlie Crimebuster. And this has been a huge weekend indeed, because the defense in the Chad Daybell case, they've already rested their case. You would think right after that we're going to talk about closing arguments and maybe some jury instructions, but wait, nope. We're talking about rebuttal witnesses. We're going to tell you all about that. But first, let me take an opportunity to welcome you on board the Charlie Crime Train today. Thank you for being a part of our Charlie Crimebuster crime family. We appreciate each and every one of you. We would like to invite you to reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. Also, if you'd like to get caught up on some of the episodes, we'll go on over to charliecrimebuster.com. And there, my friend, you can find a whole bunch of episodes. We've got a whole ton of stuff about this entire case. We even were reporting on it right back when it happened, when nobody knew exactly where the children were. So go back to charliecrimebuster.com. You can find all kinds of Lori Vallow cases for you to listen to, as well as a lot of other stuff there on the website. Now, speaking of websites, we have partnered together, and we're working together with the PeacemakerNetwork.com group of people who we are trying to do our best to do our part in helping the brave men and women who protect us every day. And we thought today we'd take a moment to let you think about some of those brave people. Now, PeacemakerNetwork.com, we stand behind law enforcement, first responders, and the military. But my friend, I want you to know we do more than stand behind them. We do our best to support them. Here is James Buckland with a thought about how we can help these brave men and women.
Military personnel are more likely to make a suicide attempt or die by suicide if they are experiencing intense emotional pain. This could include depression and trauma, such as post-traumatic stress. Risk for suicide increases when military personnel experience both depression and post-traumatic stress together. They experience things like hopelessness or perceived burdensomeness, self-hatred, unbearability, guilt, and even some disconnectedness. They'll say things like this: things will never going to change, it's always going to be the same. Or, you all would be better off without me. Or comments like this: I'm worthless and there's nothing good about me. Or even, this is terrible, I just can't take it anymore. Or, it's all my fault. And then this one: no one values me or cares about me. You see that last one? No one values me or cares about me. This is what Peacemaker Network is all about. We do care. We do value our first responders, law enforcement personnel, and military, and this is why we shine our light on PTSD and suicide awareness. We need our heroes healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Join the Peacemaker Network today. PeacemakerNetwork.com.
Now that, my friend, was produced by James Buckland, our producer, and boy, I tell you, it's moving. When every time I hear that particular spot, it moves me to think about what we owe these brave men and women who lay down their life to protect ours. And I think it's only fitting on Memorial Day weekend that we take a moment and think about that. So thank you, James, for sharing those moving words. And if you do know someone that might need the kind of help that we can give them through our connections with PeaceMakerNetwork.com, please send them to that website. And if you'd like to be a part of supporting those, then take your time to go to the website as well. All right, now back to our main focus. Unlike the Lori Vallow trial, whereby the defense chose to just attack the prosecution's case and not put on a case in chief, well, Attorney Pryor, he decided that he would put on a defense. And he did put on a defense. And so in today's episode, we're going to look at the defense's case. We're going to look about the family. We're going to look at the experts. And we're going to talk about the rebuttal. But first, let's talk about the family. He brings Chad's family, particularly the adult children, to the witness stand. First, there is Elma, Chad's daughter. And it's very apparent that Pryor's mission here is to discount the murder charge by having the family, those who knew Tammy the most, you might think, to prove that Tammy's health was not all that good, and that she actually died of natural causes rather than homicide. And here are some points that Pryor attempted to score with this jury. First, there were comments on Emma's knowledge of her mom's health. Emma says this, and I'm quoting it. She says that her mom's health started declining in the last year of her life. Quote, she was always one to meet the demands of daily life without being exhausted. But then she started going to bed before dinner some nights. It would be like 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. And she would sleep in a lot. Now, Emma was also used by Pryor to rebut the bruising part of the medical examiner brought out about the possible manner of death of Tammy. Here's what she said about Tammy's bruises. Emma says her mom bruised easily, and that she used this gel to treat the bruises. She went on to say, quote, if she were to bump her hip on the counter when she was walking by, she would get a quote-unquote massive bruise from that. Pryor then takes a moment and he asks Emma about her mom taking clogging and Zumba fitness classes. Well, Emma, she says that she and her mom were both overweight, wanted to exercise more. Said some ladies at the school invited Tammy and Emma to come to the class there at the local elementary school gym. She said they started going in April of 2019. Now, Pryor also takes a moment to ask Tammy about this idea that Tammy was training for a race, a 5K race. Emma says she was training for a race and that she had invited her mom to run the race, but that Tammy would not do it. You see, Joseph, Emma's husband, he had organized a 5K for Operation Underground Railroad, and Tammy had helped him plan it. Well, then Pryor, he comes back to Emma, and he uses her to testify about that insurance deal. You see, it has been introduced that Chad wanted that insurance increased, and that both he and Lori was not only after sex and power, but they were after money, and that this would be a motive in the death of Tammy. Emma says that the insurance company came to the school one day to speak about increasing life insurance. She went on to say it was really cheap insurance, and they encouraged us to purchase some. So both my mother and I purchased some. So that's how he countered the insurance deal. Then I believe there was a biggie. It was a moment that, well, it actually reminded me of the Casey Anthony trial. You remember when Casey's mom got on the stand, and Casey's mom testified that it was she who searched for chloroform on the computer rather than Casey. That she was the one that accessed the family computer, and she, not Casey, actually searched for that word chloroform. You remember that, don't you? If you don't, go back to charliecrimebuster.com and hear all about that trial. Well, most did not believe that in Casey's trial. Although, well, the jury might have, since amazingly enough, they found her not guilty. But the day before Tylee died, Emma said that she did a search on Chad's desktop computer for south-southwest winds. She said she did that because they were planning an outdoor event. She said, I was just trying to be an amateur weather girl, something like that. She says that there wasn't a login or anything. She just jumped online. You see, this is in reference to the search done the one day before Tylee was buried on the property. And remember, there was the burning in the fire pit of Tylee's body. So you would imagine, why would somebody be researching for southwest wind? It was researched on the computer. Most of us think Chad did it. But no, Emma, she said, I did that. Now, you may be wondering if she's really believed in her testimony. And I will share with you later in the program a recent poll of those who've been following that case in a moment. And in the cross-examination, well, the prosecution did bring a document to light. One where Chad had signed the beneficiary form, which shows that he himself was very much involved in this insurance. It wasn't just Tammy at school, it was Chad as well. Then the next witness that Pryor brings to the stand is the adult son, Garth. And he, too, points out that he believed that his mom's health was not that good. Said that she was coughing on the couch as he left for work that night. He also testified that as he returned home after work that night at the haunted house, that he went by his parents' room and actually heard his father snoring. Said he did not hear sounds like a struggle in the middle of the night. Also pointed out that his bedroom, well, it was just across the hall from his parents. Anything was going on, he should know about it. Well, all in all, it's very apparent, my friend, that Pryor is using the children to be his very best part of his defense case. And if you believe the children, well, then you might just have some doubt, as if Tammy died of natural causes or homicide. Now, you can also include Joseph, the son-in-law, in the family to support those testimonies. By the way, Joseph did a very good job on the stand. It was somewhat concerning that he actually stated that the officer, the deputy sheriff, who responded that night to the attempted shooting of a paintball gun or a real gun, whichever way you believe it, that malfunctioned, well, he said that the officer was not being truthful. That in the officer's report, he stated, the officer, that Joseph stated to him that night that he heard a scream the night someone attempted to shoot Tammy, paintball gun or not. He says that simply did not happen. He did not hear a scream, and that he did not report such to the deputy. Now, there's some interesting things about that I'm going to bring out in a few minutes. But you and I both know that, this fact, if she screamed or not, does not really impact the case, except for the fact that one or the other is not telling the truth. Is it Joseph, the son-in-law, or is it the deputy that's not being truthful? Or could it be that Joseph just does not remember, this was 4 years ago, what he told the deputy? Or maybe the deputy thought he heard him say that. Whichever, that is not a real critical part of the case, but it's one that Pryor wanted to bring to the attention of the jury. Now, they also brought out in the testimony that Tammy was not driving the vehicle she normally drives on the night that someone attempted to take a shot at her. Of course, they said paintball gun. Well, anyone who's really followed the case and knows it, most of us certainly believe it was not a paintball gun, but it was that AK rifle that they found in the presence of Alex Cox. But, my friend, this is the best chance that Pryor, in my opinion, has to try to cause some doubt in this case. Now, there was some very interesting ways that the prosecution countered this testimony on cross. And I'm going to share that right on down into the podcast. Then, after that, Pryor, he would bring his so-called experts to the stand. A couple of them, 2 or 3 of them. Now, I'm going to tell you that the best shot that he had was actually through the testimonies of the kids. You see, now, all of his professional experts, I got to say, they were very professional. They were very informed, and they held their own on the stand through both the defense and the cross-examination. The only point is, my friend, though I believe they were professional and I believe they did a good job, I just don't believe that either of them moved the needle in what the jury had already been testified to about this important stuff. For one, Chad's own GPS, it did not show his device on the ground when Alex was there on the property. That's the first thing that I know that Pryor's trying to get across to this jury through these experts. And secondly, that Chad's DNA was not found on any of the burial tools, nor was it found on any of the plastic tarps that was around little JJ or on the bodies of the children, that his DNA was not there. So the GPS setting and the DNA with Chad, I really don't believe it moved the needle. The reason I don't believe it moved the needle is because this case is not built on the location of Chad's GPS. It's apparent that he had turned it off. He was smart enough to do that. That remind you of anything else? Remember Brian Kohlberger, who turned off his phone during the Idaho student murders? Yep, the alleged murders by him. You see, the fact that he turned it off in the same way that Chad did not want his GPS to be known, that in itself can show a consciousness of guilt. And next, my friend, the case against Chad is not using DNA to prove his conspiracy involvement. It's those texts that we talked about in the last episode, that phone call we talked about in the last episode, the tons of witnesses that have come before this jury. Those, my friend, makes the solid platform in this case. So, my friend, while the experts, well, they were good and informative, I just don't believe they really got anywhere attacking the science and the digital experts that the state brought to the jury. I do not believe that they really impacted the case, in my professional opinion. So let's get back to the kids' testimony. If they are to believe, then could there be enough probable cause and doubt to get Chad off, or at least off on the charge regarding him and Tammy's murder? Well, in a moment, I'm going to tell you how the prosecution responded to this evidence. But now it's time for us to take a moment, lighten the load a little bit, and share with you what we call our Crazy Crook story. Here is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Our Crazy Crook story comes this week from Palm Beach County. Shortly after 9 p.m. on Sunday, troopers with the Florida Highway Patrol, they attempted to stop a BMW at Interstate 75, mile marker 94. Of course, that's down on Alligator Alley. And they were trying to stop them because they had reached speeds of 95 miles per hour. Well, authorities said the BMW slowed down to pull over. They often do that. I've had that happen before. Then they accelerate to flee in a reckless manner. Now, at the same time, troopers said that the right front passenger rolled down the window, threw out a black backpack. They said troopers, that BMW had reached speeds, now get this, of 155 miles per hour. And they thought they had eluded authorities, but then they turned around at the 94 mile marker, and guess what? Yep, you guessed it. They went back, crazy enough to go back to try to find that black backpack that they threw out. And now these men, they face several charges. They had threw out a handbag that actually was filled with drugs. So now these guys, they face charges of drug possession, trafficking, drug paraphernalia, possession, and tampering with evidence. And along with that, the driver's facing charges of fleeing, eluding, driving while license suspended, drug possession, trafficking, and a whole bunch of other things as well. So these idiots who were able to get away from the popo, but stupid enough to turn around to go to try to retrieve the backpack with the evidence, that would really, really put them in trouble. These, my friend, are indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now back to our main focus. Another thing that happened this week was that we actually heard Chad Daybell speak. That's right. You see, before the defense can rest, well, the judge needs to hear from the defendant if he plans to testify or not. And the judge has to share a special jury rule that says a jury cannot hold it against the defendant should he choose not to testify. So with the jury out of the court, he does ask Chad if he plans to testify. And Chad Daybell, this prophet of doom, he acknowledges in court that he does recognize his right to, and then he states verbally that he does not plan to testify. So this Chad, who's been so quiet, we actually did hear him speak in court this week. Probably a smart choice that Pryor helped him to make. So after the defense rests their case, well, you think, well, now we're going to look at closing arguments, jury instructions, get the jury off to deliberate, come up with a verdict. Well, not quite so fast. You see, now the defense has some rebuttal witnesses they want to call. They want to rebut the defense's witnesses. Yet, that includes the children, in doing so. And through that, we found another shocking moment in court. But first, there was the back and forth if the judge would allow the rebuttal witnesses. Of course, Pryor, he objected, made his arguments against calling any rebuttal witnesses at all. Said you're just going to open up a can of worms. Well, then the prosecution argues that certain things were brought up on cross that they had to rebut. You see, to rebut, it's something in legal speak that means to claim or prove the opposite, to repel an attack. A rebuttal witness is called in trial to offer evidence that is opposite of something that was previously presented or argued. But now the real problem was that some of these witnesses had been called previously, and they had been released as witnesses, which means that they could then at that time partake and listen to the testimony of the court. Now, there wasn't anything wrong with that because, you see, they had been released as a witness. But what does that mean for them to be called back to be a rebuttal witness? And of all the people, well, one of them was that deputy I told you about earlier, where Joseph had testified that the deputy put in his report that Joseph had heard a scream that night when someone attempted to shoot Tammy, and Joseph stated he did not say that to the deputy. Well, the deputy seems he contacted the prosecution. He wanted his chance to come back and state his case that he did indeed hear that. Yet, now because he had listened to some of the testimony. So, what will the judge say about that? Well, here's what the judge said about him being a witness. He stated that he was not speaking about the credibility of the deputy. In fact, he praised the deputy for being honest about listening to the testimony, but fearing that maybe even unconsciously he could have been influenced about other court testimony, the judge ruled against him being called as a rebuttal witness. So there will be no deputy coming back to rebut what Joseph said. But there are some more, and two of them took the stand. And to me, I got to tell you, I think it was a game changer regarding the defense's evidence. And I'm going to share with you that in a moment about what happened with those rebuttal witnesses. But we oftentimes, in our presentations, we try to share with you a little news that you can use. And this case that we're talking about today is tragic. Tragic that so many people died, but particularly tragic that two young people, little JJ, about 7, Tylee, 16 going on 17, lost their lives. My friend, our children are so special to us here in this country, and it's terrible when they're abused. So we want to take a moment now to give you some news you can use. So here's James Buckland, our producer, with news you can use.
After the child sex abuse scandal involving Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, Florida legislatures in 2012 passed a law that placed a greater responsibility on ordinary people to report known or suspected child abuse. Now, there may be specific mandates imposed by other states, but here in Florida, the Protection of Vulnerable Persons Act has made everyone a mandatory reporter who must call the state hotline or electronically report child abuse, including sexual abuse, when they know or reasonably suspect that it is occurring. The abuse hotline can be reached at 1-800-962-2873. That's 1-800-962-2873. The hotline operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Reports can also be made online. Either method of reporting allows most civilian reporters to make a report anonymously. People reporting abuse should be prepared to provide as many details as they can, including descriptions of the incident, information on who was involved, when and where it occurred, and information on the extent of any injuries sustained. Experts say that it's necessary to catch sexual abuse in the early stages. The warning signs often escalate from small unwanted advances to a more extreme crossing of boundaries. So it's important to take action early on by speaking to the perpetrator or reporting the abuse. Protect our children and our heritage. If you suspect child abuse, please report it immediately. Call 1-800-962-2873. That's 1-800-962-2873.
Thank you, James. As usual, right on spot. So one of the first rebuttal witnesses was a lady by the name of Lisa Marie Jensen. She is an educator at the same school that Tammy works in, and she runs the Title I department, and she works with teachers. Now, the prosecution takes time to counter the kid's testimony about Tammy's health again, and asks Ms. Jensen about Tammy's health at school. And Ms. Jensen reported Tammy was well and healthy, and strived to keep herself that way. Now, my friend, I do feel for the Daybell children. I can't imagine what they've been through. There's overwhelming evidence from multiple witnesses, though, that Tammy was in good health. That, combined with the medical examiner's information from the autopsy, my friend, I do think it will counter what the kids are attempting to say when they try to make it as though Tammy was weak and not in good health, trying to get the jury away from thinking that Chad had a part in her death. But Miss Jensen, along with witness after witness after witness, has come to the stand in this trial and told us that Tammy was in great health. But then there was another shocker, as well as something else that impeached Emma's testimony. You see, there was a statement that Pryor tried his best to keep from coming before the jury. He objected, tried his best to get it thrown out, but yet it was overruled. The prosecutor asked Jensen if Emma ever mentioned what she believed about how her mother died. Now, wait for it. She told Jensen that the way her mother died, that it was related to a blood clot, and that's what the doctors suspected. Well, my friend, that's a long way from her dying because she was run down and in bad health, isn't it? You see, it's very apparent that Emma has not been consistent in her reports on how she thinks her mother really died. I believe this was a huge hit, my friend, to the defense. And yet, there is more to come. Now, Pryor, he attempted to lessen that impact by implying that since they were only friends at school, why would Emma share something so private about Tammy? But Miss Jensen, she was a very strong rebuttal witness. She stated back, well, she said it wasn't a private issue. Her mother had passed away, and she was sharing the costs. Miss Jensen, to me, was very believable. She stood up to Cross in a very strong, assertive way. So next, the prosecution, they bring another rebuttal witness. This guy is named Jason McKay. That's what they called him, McKay. McKay worked in the room right next to Garth at the haunted house in 2019. He and Garth would talk during the slow times, and they also visited some other haunted houses together, and they hung out from time to time. Now get this. McKay stated that he had talked to Garth about the time of his mom's death just a week afterwards. And the week after she died, Garth told him, listen to this, Garth told him he found her when he got home from work. And he did not know where his father was. Now, the witness went on to say he did not remember if he said she was in bed or next to the bed, but she was kind of pale and her lips were blue. That's what Garth told him. Now, my friend, this is huge. You see, Garth had reported on stand that when he got home, He had passed his parents' room, heard his dad snoring, played video games up into the night, was woken the next morning by his dad saying, "Please help me." But, according to what this witness is saying, that wasn't the way it happened. Wasn't even the way Garth had told him that it happened. Now, earlier in the trial, we heard about a second grand jury, and now we know that that was requested not by cops, but that second grand jury that was convened, it was actually requested by the first grand jury. And the reason it was requested? To investigate if Garth had committed perjury. You see, my friend, in his testimony before them, there was enough probable cause that the first jury felt that he should be investigated for perjury. Now, please hear me. I do again feel for these young adult children of Chad and Tammy Daybell. They've been through so much. Their mom taken from them in death, unexpectedly. Their dad on trial for his life. It is very easy to see why they would like to say things to help save their dad. Well, they may have even thought to themselves that Chad was being framed by Alex and Lori. They must do everything they can to help their dad. They've got to put the right twist on all this information, including maybe having different memories about how they say things happen. They may have even convinced themselves of that alternate reality that their own dad so often attempted to pull others in. And while the kids, well, they were the very best chance, I believe, that Pryor has to defend Chad and Tammy's death. To me, I got to tell you, folks, they simply were not credible in light of so many other witnesses who had no reason to lie and so much other evidence that contradicts their own testimonies. The other witnesses and a ton of evidence, well, I believe it's going to prove the prosecution's case. And hey, friend, I'm not alone here. Remember I told you what do others think about the kid's testimony? Well, in a recent poll of over 5,000 people listening to the kid's testimony, 95% did not believe that the children were credible. But my friend, while that poll is one thing, I got to tell you, it's not the jury, because the only poll that really counts is how the jury polls when they come to deliberate. So let me ask you, what do you think the jury is now believing at this point in the case about the children's testimony? They are the ones that will really count. So here's where we are. Court is out now until Tuesday because this is Memorial Day weekend. And then there will be at least perhaps one more rebuttal witness. We know there's going to be jury instructions. And there's going to be closing arguments. Well, just maybe before the next episode, the jury will be deliberating. Or not. You never know how these things can go. We may even have a verdict before the next episode. Or not. Whichever, let me encourage you, stay tuned for our coming Charlie Talks True Crime. We do that on Wednesday nights. It's on our YouTube channel. We would encourage you to look into that if you would. There we discuss this episode and we share more updates. Hey, check out the YouTube channel if you're not done so yet. Just go to YouTube and tag it Charlie Crimebuster. In fact, we'll make it easy for you. We'll put a link right in our show notes. So until this next time, as we always say here at Charlie Crimebuster, till this time, next time, my friend, stay safe, stay alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.